Have you ever wondered why some people insist on using science to prove they're better than others? Isn't science supposed to reveal truths, not puff up egos? Yet history is full of examples where so-called scientists turn their measuring tapes, rulers, and questionable logic into weapons of prejudice. And let's be honest, what's scarier than bad science? Bad science with an agenda. Today we're cracking open The Mismeasure of Man by Stephen Jay Gould, a book that doesn't just expose the bad science behind racism and classism, it outright roasts it. Gould wasn't just a scientist, he was a detective, peeling back layers of bias masquerading as objective research.
People talk about the fact that black people score 15 points less than white people. What do you think of this kind of numbering?
It's a fact whose meaning is totally unclear and whose existence doesn't in any sense specify the cause. Take the black-white difference in America, which is an average of 15 points, which is one standard deviation. By definition, the test is standardized so that 15 points will be a standard deviation. That's true. Nobody denies that. The issue has never been that. The issue has been why. And the existence just doesn't tell you anything about why. The existence of the 15-point difference is thoroughly consistent with the two utterly extreme interpretations, namely nature and nurture. That is, in principle, it could be so. I don't think it is, that the difference is due to inborn capacities that vary between the races. And the other obvious explanation is that the difference is due to the enormous social disadvantages that the legacy and history of racism continues to impose upon the lives of black people in the United States. Either explanation would equally well account for the difference. So it is a fact whose meaning is totally unspecified by the existence of the fact itself.
And hey, if you love uncovering buried truths and calling out history's biggest scientific fails, hit that like button and subscribe to Veil of Time. Let's dive in. When heads were measured. Let's travel back to the 19th century, a time when scientists believed they could measure intelligence by the size of your skull. Yes, craniometry, literally measuring skulls, was all the rage. It sounds absurd now, but back then, they thought the bigger the skull, the smarter the person. As if brains were storage units and intelligence was just about how many gigabytes you had. Samuel George Morton was the reigning champion of this bizarre science. He collected skulls from around the world, measured their capacity, and conveniently concluded that white people had the largest skulls, and therefore the biggest brains. Morton's work was hailed as groundbreaking until Gould came along and debunked it. Gould meticulously reanalyzed Morton's data and found, let's just say, some creative liberties. Morton had cherry-picked his samples, excluded inconvenient skulls, and even adjusted measurements to fit his preconceived conclusions. It's like a kid rigging Monopoly by slipping extra money under the board. Morton wasn't measuring skulls, he was measuring his own bias. Can you imagine Morton today? He'd be the guy posting charts with a caption like, "Data doesn't lie." While everyone else comments, "Sir, your data is lying," social media would eat him alive. Breaking news, scientists busted for fake skull stats, head-sized hoax. But here's the scariest part. Morton's studies weren't just academic curiosities. They were used to justify slavery, colonialism, and segregation. His so-called science became a tool for oppression, proving that bad data can lead to very real consequences. The IQ obsession. By the 20th century, craniometry had fallen out of fashion, thankfully. But the urge to rank human worth didn't go away. Instead, it found a new tool. IQ tests. These tests were designed to quantify intelligence with a single number, as if the vast complexity of the human mind could be boiled down to a test score. The story starts innocently enough. French psychologist Alfred Binet created the first IQ test to help identify kids who needed extra help in school. But when his idea made its way to America, psychologists like Louis Terman and Henry Goddard decided to weaponize it. Suddenly, IQ tests weren't just for kids. They were being used to rank entire populations. And guess what? The results conveniently aligned with existing racial and class hierarchies. Shocking, right? Why stop at helping children when you can create a tool to prove your own superiority? Do we really think solving a few math problems and vocabulary questions can define a person's worth? Or were these tests just a convenient way to keep certain groups in power? Gould dismantled the myth of IQ as a fixed measure of intelligence. He showed that intelligence isn't a single entity. It's more like an ecosystem, with different traits interacting and evolving. But instead of appreciating this complexity, early IQ enthusiasts acted like they could summarize the entire rainforest with one tree. And the implications were horrifying. IQ tests were used to justify everything from immigration restrictions to eugenics programs. Yes, eugenics, the pseudo-science of improving the human race by controlling who gets to reproduce. It's like science took a hard left turn into dystopian fiction. Science with an agenda. Gould didn't just critique the methods behind craniometry and IQ testing. He also exposed their motivations. These weren't just innocent mistakes. They were deliberate attempts to use science as a tool of power. Take the infamous The Bell Curve, published in the 1990s. The authors argued that intelligence differences between races were largely genetic and therefore unchangeable. Translation: some people are just born better. But Gould wasn't buying it. He tore apart their data, showing how they manipulated statistics to fit their narrative. It's like baking a cake, forgetting the sugar, and then blaming the recipe when it tastes awful. If the bell curve were a recipe, it'd be for disaster. Step 1, take a handful of bad data. Step 2, add a pinch of bias. Step 3, bake at 350 degrees of nonsense. If these studies were movies, they'd be filed under fiction. Seriously, the amount of creative interpretation involved is award-worthy. And it wasn't just about proving superiority, it was about maintaining systems of oppression. By claiming inequality was natural, these studies gave a scientific veneer to deeply ingrained prejudices. It's the classic playbook: dress up your biases in a lab coat, and suddenly they look credible. The bigger picture. Why does any of this matter? Because bad science doesn't just stay in the lab. It shapes policies, influences education, and perpetuates inequality. Gould's work reminds us that science is only as objective as the people conducting it. And when those people are driven by ideology, the results can be devastating. Think about it. Morton's skull measurements were used to justify slavery. IQ tests were used to bar immigrants and sterilize marginalized groups. And today, algorithms and AI systems, supposedly neutral tools, are being called out for perpetuating bias. Have we really learned our lesson, or are we just using fancier tools to repeat the same mistakes? If intelligence isn't fixed and science can be so easily manipulated, how can we ensure we're using knowledge for good and not harm? Are algorithms and AI as neutral as we think, or are they just modern tools for reinforcing old biases? Intelligence beyond the numbers. Gould's ultimate message is both simple and profound. Intelligence is far too complex to be reduced to a single number or metric. It's influenced by culture, environment, and countless other factors. Trying to rank it is like trying to weigh a cloud. Sure, you can try, but what are you really measuring? And here's where Gould shines. He didn't just critique bad science. He offered a vision for what science could be. A tool for understanding, not judgment. A path to discovery, not division. Gould believed that if we approach science with humility and curiosity, we could uncover truths that unite us rather than divide us. Maybe the real measure of intelligence is admitting we don't know everything, or at least not pretending we do with fake skull measurements. Honestly, I think we'd all score higher on an intelligence test if we just admitted we don't know everything. So what can we learn from all this? First, don't let anyone put you in a box, whether it's based on your head size, your test scores, or any other arbitrary measure. Intelligence isn't a number. It's about what you do with your unique abilities. Second, always question authority. Science is only as objective as the people conducting it, and history has shown us they're not always trustworthy. If intelligence isn't fixed, and science is just as flawed as the people behind it, how do we ensure it serves humanity rather than divides it? Are we using knowledge to uplift each other, or are we just finding smarter ways to justify inequality? Thanks for exploring this with me on Veil of Time. If you enjoyed unpacking this slice of history, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold stories and hidden truths. Until next time, stay curious and question everything.